Welcome to today's Explainer. Look, I am absolutely thrilled you're here, because today we're completely tearing down the facade of modern wealth building. If you're exhausted from hearing that the secret to becoming a millionaire is just waking up at 4 a.m., chanting positive affirmations, and hustling until you literally drop, well, you are in the exact right place. Today, we're doing a completely unfiltered deep dive into the Machiavellian wealth secrets. This is the stealth investor blueprint that your average motivational speakers will never, ever tell you about. We're talking about the raw, unvarnished truth of how absolute wealth is actually built and protected in the shadows. Let's unpack this stealth investor mindset, shall we?
So, what is the absolute biggest lie out there about getting rich? You know the one. We're fed this myth daily that sheer, brute force hard work and a perfectly optimized morning routine are all it takes to create wealth. But the source material we're unpacking today exposes this as a complete fairy tale. The reality? Building genuine generational wealth relies on hidden, highly strategic, and frankly, almost dangerous strategies. It requires a fundamental shift into a stealth investor mindset, one that operates entirely under the radar.
Listen to this quote. The truth was for kings, not commoners. Over 500 years ago, Niccolo Machiavelli observed the true mechanics of power and wealth, and he wrote them down. Now, these 9 investor rules were considered so incredibly dangerous by the establishment at the time that the church actually banned his work, labeling it the devil's book. Governments literally burned the copies in the streets. Why? Because it contained the unvarnished truth about power and wealth accumulation, a truth that was meant only for kings and the elite, definitely not for everyday people. Today, we're taking those burned pages and analyzing exactly how they work.
Let's dive right into Pillar 1, the psychology of stealth.
Before you even think about building wealth, you've got to rewire your brain and honestly kill your own ego. The modern world practically begs you to show off, right? But the true investor mindset demands that you choose to be a fox, not a lion. This is rule 1. Think about it. A lion is highly visible, loud, majestic. But exactly because it's so visible, it becomes a massive target for every hunter out there. The fox, on the other hand, is invisible. It maneuvers in the shadows, it survives, and it wins. Look at history. Giovanni de' Medici was the wealthiest man in Italy, quietly controlling the entire European economy. But if you passed him on the street, he wore plain clothes, lived in a totally simple house. Fast forward to today, you see that exact same investor mindset in Warren Buffett, living in the same modest house he bought back in 1958. When you post your new car or that shiny watch on social media like a roaring lion, you aren't looking cool. You are just painting a massive target on your own back. Which brings us to rule 2, the tactics of fake poverty. Now, why on earth would you intentionally complain about slow markets, wear ordinary clothes, and actively downplay your profits? Let me tell you a quick story about Francesco, a Renaissance textile merchant from our sources. Francesco had an absolutely massive first year in business. Huge. But instead of upgrading his office or buying flashy things, he just kept wearing his old clothes and sitting in his tiny, cramped shop. When people asked how business was going, he'd complain. He'd say the market was slow, he was barely surviving. The result? His competitors totally ignored him. His suppliers actually gave him pity discounts. The government didn't even bother tracking him. And within 5 years, he built a massive monopoly right under everyone's noses. Human psychology dictates that people help the weak and sabotage the strong. You got to use that to your advantage. $58 billion? Nope, that's not a typo. That was the staggering net worth of Ingvar Kamprad, the legendary founder of IKEA. We're pulling forward Machiavelli's Rule 9 here because it perfectly solidifies the psychology of stealth. The rule is dead simple. Stop the desperate need to look rich and focus on actually being rich. Kamprad had $58 billion at his disposal, yet his daily routine looked absolutely nothing like the billionaires you see flexing on Instagram today. Here is what this invisible billionaire's checklist actually looked like. He traveled exclusively in economy class. He drove a 15-year-old Volvo. He actively used discount coupons at the grocery store, and the guy ate street food. People laughed at him, calling him a cheap old man. But actually, scratch that, he wasn't being cheap at all. He was executing a brilliant defensive strategy. By hiding any signs of wealth, he entirely avoided jealousy, unwanted attention, and that constant stream of people asking for handouts. Genuine wealth doesn't need to prove itself to strangers. When you finally stop performing for the crowd, your wealth is protected. All right, moving on to Pillar 2, defense and risk mitigation. As your portfolio grows, your biggest threats actually shift. They go from external competitors to internal envy. Consider this startup founder in Mumbai who built this brilliant tech company that hit a 100 crore valuation. Amazing, right? But he learned Machiavelli's Rule 3 the incredibly hard way. The enemy is in your house. He was thrilled with his success, naturally, and he wanted to celebrate, so he threw a massive party and invited his entire network. But he made a fatal flaw. At that party, he revealed everything. All his revenue figures, all his future strategic plans. He just wanted to look like the smartest guy in the room. Well, within 6 months, his CTO resigned, taking all that proprietary technical knowledge right out the door. Then, his marketing head left to start a rival company using the exact same business model he just bragged about. Facing immense investor pressure and these new, perfectly equipped rivals, that 100-core company completely collapsed within 2 years. Boom, gone. His own team became his enemy, simply because he handed them the ammunition. The stealth investor knows this for a fact. Those who do not know about your success cannot plot to destroy it. Sun Tzu famously wrote, "When strong, appear weak." This perfectly mirrors Machiavelli's Rule 6 and Rule 7. You absolutely must control your image. Rule 7 explicitly states that you should sometimes intentionally appear less smart than you actually are. Why? Because knowledge is a threat to others. In a corporate environment, the person who looks the smartest, they get dumped with the most work, they become the primary target of brutal office politics, and they face constant competitive sabotage. But if you play down your intelligence, saying you just got lucky with a project, people lower their guards. You become invisible to office threats while you're quietly gathering information and power. Let's transition into Pillar 3, the mechanics of true wealth. What are the real structural differences of the investor mindset? I want you to answer this really uncomfortable question. If you stopped working tomorrow, how long would you actually survive? A week? A month? A year? This brings us straight to Rule 8. Because if your answer is less than a year, it really doesn't matter if you make a massive salary. You are still essentially a slave to your time. You're just trapped in a very beautiful, gilded cage. The stealth investor mindset mandates that you completely decouple your time from your income. And breaking out of that cage requires immense patience. Let's look at the 2017 crypto collapse as the perfect cautionary tale for Rule 5. On day 1, an investor puts in 1 lock. By day 60, he hits a 5x return. 5 locks. Incredible, right? But on day 65, he completely ruins it. He starts bragging heavily on Facebook, posting screenshots, calling himself a crypto genius. Well, by day 90, the consequences arrive. He gets hit with massive tax notices, receives physical threats from people demanding money, panic sells everything, and literally loses it all. Fast money goes fast. True wealth is built slowly, methodically, and silently. Patience isn't a weakness, guys. It's a vital tactical strategy. So what are you patiently building? You really have a choice here: monuments or systems. During the Renaissance, the flashy families spent their fortunes building monuments. Grand palaces, massive parties, basically the equivalent of today's Ferraris and Rolexes. Monuments eat your money. Within 3 generations, those families were totally broke. But the strategic families, the stealth investors, they built systems. Trade routes, supply chains, or in today's terms, dividend portfolios and passive income streams. Systems feed you, even while you sleep. A Rolex makes you look wealthy, but a passive income system actually makes you wealthy. So how do you practically build this true investor mindset? Here's the playbook for building an empire in the shadows. Executing Rule 4. First, create multiple income streams, but publicly, just claim you have a boring, ordinary job. When people ask what you do, just shrug and say, "Oh, I manage some logistics, it pays the bills." Meanwhile, you are quietly networking. Don't go to those flashy industry mixers. Network quietly with low-profile chartered accountants who do the real work in the background. Build relationships with behind-the-scenes bankers and lawyers who actively avoid the media spotlight. You build your real power and your financial networks completely out of the spotlight where absolutely no one can track your growth or plot against you. And that brings us to the ultimate, inescapable conclusion of this entire explainer. Money is loud. Wealth is quiet. When you finally stop trying to prove your worth to a bunch of strangers on the internet, when you drop the ego and embrace the shadows, that is when your actual wealth can finally grow uninterrupted. You stop being a target, and you start being an architect. So, I'm going to leave you with this provocative final question to reflect on. Will you continue performing for the crowd, or are you ready to become invisible? It's a fundamental choice about exactly how you want to live your life and build your future. If this deep dive resonated with you today, I challenge you to share this explainer with someone you know who is currently trapped in that loud social media hustle culture. They might just really need to hear this. Adopt the Quiet Investor